Welcome, everybody, to You Have Permission, the show that aims to take both Christianity and the modern world of science and culture very seriously. My name's Dan Koch. I'm a licensed therapist and a post-evangelical liberal Protestant trying to think through complex issues with care and compassion, avoiding the all-too-easy tribalism that's so common these days. In other words, Jason, what am I trying to do in the language of our shared evangelical upbringing? Do you have a nice cliche phrase queued up?
Dan, I think you're trying to lay it at the foot of the cross, aren't you?
I'm trying to lay it at the foot of the cross. Thank you, Jason. And I am joined today by Jason Kirk, editor at The Athletic, sports writer and novelist, and a sports and religion podcaster. We're mostly talking about his novel, Hell is a Place Without You. Hell is a, did I do that wrong?
World.
Hold on. We're mostly talking about his novel today, Hell is a World Without You, set in our shared 90s and 2000s American evangelical upbringing. Jason, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Dan. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I think this episode's going to be half on the main feed and half on the Patreon feed. And the reason for that is that I want to get pretty nerdy about sort of the process of taking this shared upbringing and novelizing it, basically putting it, creating a setting for a fictional story, which is something that I'm really interested in, but kind of falls out of the middle of what I normally talk about here. However, in the first half of our conversation, which will be available for everybody, I want to talk about your story and how that found its way into the novel. I think there's some really interesting connections there, and probably even a little bit about what fictional storytelling can do to sort of get us thinking about big, what we might call nonfiction questions about God, questions about, values and really tough issues. Like, I think that narrative storytelling can do a bunch of things that nonfiction podcasting and writing can't do. And I think that'll probably still be in that first half of the conversation. But if you want to hear the whole thing, head to patreon.com/Dan Koch and become a patron. You get at least 2 of these exclusive episodes per month and access to the Facebook group. Okay, all that out of the way, Jason. I wanted to start with probably my favorite thing about the novel, no offense, the chapter titles, which you not only got very creative with, but also it was like you were aiming them straight at me. And I think you knew that. And actually in your email, in your cold open email to me, you should have included some of these chapter titles. I would have probably responded even quicker. Okay, a lot of references to like bands that we both love, but also kind of, if you know, evangelical terms. So I have prepared, Jason, my top 8 chapter titles from Hell is a World Without You. And feel free to kind of get in and say a thing or two about each one if you want. I'll leave you a little space, but no pressure. Okay. Number 8, the chapter titled Acquire the Fire.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to an Acquire the Fire stadium youth event where we're all getting on fire for the Lord?
I went to a bunch of very similar events. I never went to one of officially theirs, but I get it. I went to similar ones.
Teen Mania, Billy Graham Crusades. Yeah.
I also went as a young child to Promise Keepers, the adult male version of those things. So
same. I went to one. Yeah.
That was a fun title. That was on all of these. It was like a long process where I felt like I had like 8 really good candidates for each one, and that one is like part of that chapter is literally about acquiring a fire because it's about the youth group game where you're like trying to get everyone's candles lit in a certain amount of time for theological reasons. And so it was, it's lots of double meanings.
Because of the sexual double meaning involved in so many of those youth group mixers. The real fuel was the hormones, not the Holy Spirit. Yeah.
Early on in that chapter, they're sneaking away to lock in. So yes.
Yeah. I got some stories there that are not necessarily fit to be told. Okay, the next 6 out of 8 are all music. They are all song titles. And then my number 1 is not a song title. So my number 7 chapter title, What It Is to Burn. Nice Finch, deep early 2000s emo reference there. So you kind of obviously were in that world. A bunch of these are going to be kind of in that realm.
Oh, yeah. And I wanted a mix of like Christian market bands and secular market bands. Like, Finch, no,
You accomplished
not a
it.
lot of religious overtones that I know of. But, there is so much crossover within specifically that music scene that had to have, just some secular market bands. And again, it's, that chapter, that title has like religious meanings and human relationship meanings within that chapter. There's a lot of crushing going on in that chapter.
Okay. Well, we don't want to give away too much, obviously, about the plot in case people want to read the book. Number 6, and this was the dagger straight to my heart, is "Be My Escape." This is the top single from the band Reliant K, and longtime listeners will know that my old band Sherwood did 2 U.S. tours with them, and that they are still some of my best friends from that era of my life. So I love a good Reliant K reference.
Yeah. And the other thing I tried to do is I tried to make it so that the title would sort of like gesture at the theme and maybe what's going on in the chapter, but then we'd also reference it a second time. So like later in that chapter, a couple characters discuss an earlier Reliant K song, Marilyn Manson Ate My Girlfriend.
Yeah. Had some fun chats with those fellows about that song, which was, I think, their first successful single, of any kind of sort, if I recall correctly. Okay, next up, moving from Reliant K to their tour buddies, Switchfoot, we have the chapter titled "The Beautiful Letdown."
The opening chapter, which it's got to be. It's got to be a big band, and we got to sort of walk people into it. Like they're the first band I mentioned within the story as well.
Switchfoot's a good palette. That's a good opening salvo. Yeah, right.
I'm not going to start you off with Rackets and Drapes or Brainwash Projects. We're going to start with the band everybody knows. Beautiful Letdown sort of hints at the, I think, the dramatic emotional tonal shifts that we get into pretty quickly.
Yeah. Next up, Deep Cut. This is a Further Seems Forever song, Snowbirds and Townies. I actually just spent on my music podcast, Pretty Good Vibrations. It's not out yet. As we are recording this, Pretty Good Vibrations is in the middle of a just shockingly long, about 8-hour long, 5-part 2000s emo deep dive set of episodes, and we discussed this song on there. So I'll save that for people who want to go deep. But I love a good Further Seems Forever reference.
Oh yeah. New Year's Project was the song my wife and I had played at our wedding. So that's our bona fides.
Yeah. Yeah, we're already friends. Okay, moving quickly here. Number 3, What If I Stumble? DC Talk, fantastic. Number 2, The Places You've Come to Fear the Most. Nice dashboard confessional reference there. We got double Chris Carrabba duty here. And then number 1, my favorite, definitely my favorite chapter title, Covenant Eyes, which if people don't know is specific software for like pornography tracking and stuff like that within the Christian movement. That one made me chuckle.
Yeah, and that chapter has a lot going on about eyes and visuals, and in pretty much every way that eyes can work, every direction. There's a lot going on there. So,
I might ask you a bit more about titling chapters, just from like a novel perspective, because that's not always done. It's certainly done in children's stories, like children's or young adult novels, not so much, right, in like literary fiction and stuff. But as I said, we're going to try and save the nerdy shit for later. So I want to kind of get into some autobiography here, because first of all, let me just make sure I'm right to assume. I don't think I could be wrong about this unless you are an alien and you're actually out to destroy us in some way, that you could have written this book having not experienced all of this stuff. Because I obviously that's kind of a big part of it, is you have this sort of write what you know, is that old line, advice given to writers of all kinds. So I'm assuming even an autobiographical connection here between at least plenty of what the main character goes through and what you have lived through. And one of the things I like that's going on right away is there is this tension between a deep-seated desire to fit in an evangelical context, while also grappling with doubts and desires, right? The age, there's sexual desires and other desires, friendship-related stuff, but then there's also doubts about this tidy evangelical narrative. And I wanted to start here. Like, how did your desire to fit in manifest itself? Like, what did that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I mean, to a large extent, it is certainly autobiographical. And I find myself in like all of the characters, honestly. Like, it's sort of like me sort of like just spread around through everyone. That
Right.
juxtaposition of like wanting to be in the world, but to be not in the world, while also being of the world, and saving the world, and all that stuff, all that stuff you're taught as a young evangelical. I mean, I went to public school in high school. I was homeschooled in middle school, and I went to private Christian school in elementary school. So it was like, I got a taste of everything, and that public high school experience, I very much remember it being a mix of, I don't want to be the oddball preaching, in the halls. I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I feel like I have to, because not only will someone go to hell because of me, that will be a stain on my soul as well. So it was like, on the one hand, you want to fit in, and on the other, you desperately do not want to fit in. And at the same time, I think there's this other element of, by not fitting in, you are fitting in. Like, you are establishing a group of people that you're a part of by saying, like, by saying I am different from 90% of the people here in some way. You are saying I am just like this 10% of people. Therefore, I do have a tribe. So like. And like we're taught those things, but we're taught that you're supposed to be a misfit. You're supposed to be a misfit. But what we're saying is you're supposed to fit in with this group of other misfits, right?
Maybe the ultimate example of that was the DC Talk rebranded Fox's Book of Martyrs, which they titled Jesus Freaks after their huge album and song, Jesus Freak, the crossover single. That's sort of the far end of it, right? Is that here, and of course, that there's a long Christian history of reading the stories of the martyrs. Probably was bigger, like in Catholic and Orthodox circles before they kind of brought that back into evangelical Protestantism with that book, which I think was also like a huge success as a book, right? And kind of probably launched a million youth group book clubs and conversations about that topic. That's sort of the far end of like what we were taught you might expect if things were to go really poorly. I have a couple friends whose parents were more extreme in that respect, I would say, and who actually kind of prepared them for an eventual martyr's death. Maybe not like definitely, but as a real possibility. I'm very grateful to say I didn't have that experience. How far along that slider was your experience in terms of like, how bad were you taught to expect it could get for standing up for your faith?
Oh yeah, I was taught to yearn to be shot at a public school. And when I say that, sometimes people say,
shit.
oh, well, when I say that, sometimes people respond with like, oh, so you went to church after Columbine. No, this was before Columbine.
It's pre-Columbine, yeah.
Yeah, the legend of Columbine, the story of the young person was shot, and then a bunch of Protestants and Catholics made up a story about no, she was a Christian martyr. Like, no, it was just tragedy. It was just a tragedy. That was all it was. It was a person who was shot. But that mythologizing of Saint Cassie, that was not a new thing. That was an end result. That was Christians yearning to be persecuted and then deciding it had happened. Like the ultimately the genesis of this book was a moment in middle school for me before Columbine, when a bunch of us were sitting in an auditorium at a Southern Baptist church, and a group of men came into the room and did a skit. Will you deny your faith if you have, if grown men are waving around guns? And they pretended to shoot one of our friends. And like, we just sort of shrugged and thought like, oh, okay, this kind of stuff happens. And didn't really think about it for 10, 15, 20 years. And like that was going on with, DC Talk, the Jesus Freak video had all sorts of Christian persecution imagery. The Ray Bolt song about a father who wants to orphan his child in the name of religion. We were raised on rapture culture that taught us like, you should be so weird that you literally can't exist on earth anymore. Like all of it, it was just, it was, yeah, I certainly wrote down, when you're a kid, you write down, you journal your prayers or whatever. I certainly wrote down, like, please let me be martyred, like, without question. Because, like, what were we taught? It was essentially, that's the ultimate way to punch your ticket, right? There is no more deserving person in heaven than, the person who lays down his life for a set of beliefs, is what we were taught. And yeah, so I'd say pretty extreme.
That's pretty far. That slider is pulled pretty far over. I mean, maybe there's a few more notches past it, like people who are in really more kind of cult-like, fringe sects and stuff like that. But that's pretty intense. Certainly a lot more intense than I had it. Part of that might have been that I was in the Bay Area of California, which I think had a moderating effect on this. I forgot to ask you earlier, Jason, where did you grow up? Where geographically did these experiences take place?
So I was born in Atlanta, went to First Baptist Atlanta for a time, where the pastor at that time, or not at that time, but he was a president of the Southern Baptist Convention. My high school years, I was up at First Baptist Woodstock in Metro Atlanta, where the pastor was then and also a president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And then he had a sex scandal. It was Johnny Hunt, but yeah. So Southern Baptist Church is big and small around Metro Atlanta.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a bit sense of it. The other thing I wanted to say is that, so I developed a spiritual abuse scale, and one of the subtypes of spiritual abuse, or more accurately, experiences that may produce spiritual harm or abuse, may result in that, is one that I call embracing violence. And it actually kind of covers a bunch of the slightly different things you mentioned, these skits or hell houses that are trying to like motivate religious decisions by using like horror and terror, right? The idea being that like, yeah, we embrace this kind of a violent view because that's the way that God actually works in the world. It's all over the Bible, and we believe that God works that way today. And so that's the justification. And if you believe that, it makes perfect sense. It follows logically that you would also utilize that motivational force, of course, fear, super motivating for human beings. Then there's the problematic passage that perfect love casts out all fear. But we'll leave that one to the side while we're planning the next school shooting skit. And then also end times teachings, right? And the way that those were used and kind of leveraged, the way that I sort of think about that, and I'll see if it resonates with you, is that, you might motivate a young person through a school shooting skit or a drunk driving skit where they end up in hell. But young people know that most of them are not going to die anytime soon, right? Like, yeah, those are accidents. But we do have a sense, even at 14, 17, that it doesn't happen to everybody all the time. Enter the rapture. The rapture can occur no matter what age you are. And I think that psychologically what that does is it gives the speaker, whoever the person is who's trying to make an impact with their preaching, it ups the stakes, and it makes death imminent for people of any age, not just older people or people who are sick, right? And so it fills kind of a need there in terms of raising the stakes for the message that those people, I believe often in good faith and truly believe this is the most important thing for these children to hear. I disagree a lot about it, but like I recognize that that's what they're doing. And that has helped me make sense of why those teachings were so widely used, because of that sort of gap that they can fill. Does that resonate with your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I mean, that young people believe themselves to be invincible, right? It's just sort of part of being young.
Yeah.
Is that, this is why we did jackass shenanigans, and this is why we skateboarded on roofs, and we clearly did not believe that we were capable of dying anytime soon, but we certainly believed we were capable of being raptured at any moment, and you better be on your best behavior while you're skateboarding on a roof. And that, like,
my friends and I actually made a show called Jack Crap. That was like our VHS version of Jackass. Yeah, so that
is the most.
We had the same childhood, Jason, just across the coast, opposite coasts from each other.
That's the most 2000s youth group thing I have ever heard.
Mostly 90s for me. I graduated high school in 01, so you might be a few years younger, but yeah, it's all the same culture.
Around the same. Yeah. Let's call it 9/11 era. But yeah, that sense of impending apocalypticism, it's been a part of Christianity since the very beginning, and the immediate tradition that Christianity sprang from. But it is so much of it has been about like Jesus is coming here, so we'd better be on our best behavior. The rapture is this whole other thing where like we're going to abandon this planet at any moment. So like to hell with this planet, almost literally, right? So it was like it was that tool of urgency, but framed in a way where it was not about improving anything about the world. It was just about like, do you have your spacesuit ready? Do you have the eject button ready? Are you ready to bail at a moment's notice? So, yeah, like it would have been a lot better, if we'd been told like, hey, make sure everyone in your neighborhood is fed, so you're ready when God comes, right? Like that's a much better way to do it.
Yeah. So that tension between wanting to fit in evangelically and wanting to fit in kind of more with your public school friends or the wider culture, and the sort of doubts about this seamless narrative that's being presented to you. Do you remember when you first noticed that tension and what it was focused on?
I remember one very early moment, and it appears in the book in the first chapter. It's a character Isaac, the protagonist, encounters. It's one of the first friends he makes at his new church, and she says that she read Jurassic Park at the library and learned some things about evolution that seemed to make a whole lot of sense, but that did not square with what she was learning in church, and that was very real for me.
Yeah, dinosaurs. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a big Jurassic Park tattoo. I have a tattoo of a T-Rex. Life finds a way, and so does she. Ultimately, for that reason, and I didn't even realize it was the reason when I got that tattoo. You know what I mean? Just like, oh no, I like it, and then I thought about it like, life did find a way, didn't it? But yeah, that like the pop culture, secular pop culture I wasn't like sheltered, but I sure thought I was supposed to try to shelter myself. And obviously there were things I was that everyone around me tried to steer me away from, but like even at that point, it was not hard to find secular hip hop. It was not hard to find ways to download secular movies. It wasn't difficult to sneak to a friend's house to play video games you weren't supposed to play. So like the sheltering, it was a question of how much could my curiosity hold up against my desire to shelter myself. And there were a lot of breakages in that force field.
You are probably exactly the age where that starts to change, because I remember like peer-to-peer file sharing just coming into its own when I was like a junior and senior in high school. And like that's for the emo nerds, like that's how I heard the Bleed American demos by Jimmy Eat World before they recorded the album. And we were all losing our minds over that when this is around 2000. But like subsequent generations, even 5-6 years younger than me, I'm 40 today. All of a sudden, like the way that the internet is rapidly expanding, obviously people could always go to friends' houses, right? That's always kind of been an option, sort of the analog breaking out of the mold, so to speak. But especially being able to do it digitally and having access to that content and information about the wider world. I mean, you are like patient zero. You are like exactly the right age as to when that's really changing for adolescents who are raised evangelical.
Oh yeah. I think all the time about. Part of the fun of this project was writing about young people who are on the cusp of history. Like there is only one. There's even a character in there who says there's only one generation in the history of the world that that the young people in that world are taught like you shouldn't. There are things on the internet you shouldn't be looking at. Yet they have 100% access to them, and their parents didn't. You know what I mean? Like right now, young people.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like our elders had no idea how difficult it was for us, right? Like these days, a young person, it's like, well, yeah, your parents had to go through that too.
Yeah, my sons, when they get older, they will know how to do certain things better than me, but it's going to be a while. They're going to have to get pretty old before like they could outsmart me with their internet usage, right? Like, you know, and we're just maybe sort of the youngest parents. We might be about the oldest parents for whom that's true, right? Like, so there was that weird little, it's almost like a technological version of the boomers are the first generation who don't say that they want their kids to be better off than them or something. I haven't seen the real data on that one. I'm paraphrasing perhaps some sort of boomer hatred. You know, it's like, don't quote me too seriously there. And I know I have boomer listeners who I love very much.
At times it feels like a fair inference, but yeah, I mean, it was a generation with like, I think about, there was a point in high school when I didn't have the internet at home. Then there was a point in high school where I had the internet in my pocket. You know what I mean? Like it was like, it's insane to go back and think about. There is this, 2 to 10 year pivot from computers being like, it's the weird thing for like spreadsheets to like, this is like half my social life. You know what I mean? And like, what a thing to live through that as a young person.
I wonder, because of that weird overlap period there was a time, I think it would be safe to say, where young Christians had a unique ability to still do and say the things that would get them approval within evangelical culture, but then have perhaps this entirely separate digital life or somewhat separate digital life, right? Not like that's much easier to do than, on Saturdays I go to the mall and I change my clothes and I dress like a goth or something. Like someone can always run into you at the mall. But if it's just digital, and if the gatekeepers and the adults in that world don't even know where you are, quote unquote, and how you're building that community, especially digitally, that's also interesting and fits right in with that kind of central tension in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I thought a lot about how we had, just like you said, it was a way to experience not being fake, but, wearing multiple faces, like, which is just a natural, normal thing that people have to learn how to do. And we had that sense of, I can go on AOL Instant Messenger. There's a ton of AIM in the book. That was our messaging service, other people at MSN and what have you, but we were...
Oh yeah, I was AIM. Oh yeah.
My whole crew was team AIM. And it was, you go away to church camp and you meet a new friend and like, yes, I have an AIM friend in a whole other state, and you had your nationwide network.
Absolutely.
It worked essentially like Twitter. It really did. But like that sense of, we have this thing on the internet. It's how we stay in touch. And like, yeah, there's some, evangelical stuff happening and so forth. But like, also it's like church kids just being normal kids. And the adults knew nothing about it. They like, when they would tell us like, hey, don't get into bad stuff on the computer, they were thinking about porn. They were thinking about like, probably just porn, honestly. That's probably all they knew. Like they had no idea that we were also...
Maybe some other secular talking points or something would be
or like we'll find dinosaur facts. I don't know. But yeah, they had no idea what we could possibly be getting into. And honestly, one of the most fruitful for us and damaging for that institution things that was going on is just like, we were able to let the mask slip and just be people,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that technological pivot, it's a good thing that a lot of elders had no idea what was going on. And I think a lot about how like for younger people these days, it's not quite the same because, now they're warned about, don't follow too many ex-evangelical influencers on Instagram. And, like, and like half of, all the pastors are on Instagram and you know what I mean? Like the arms race, there are only those few little moments where like young people truly have the advantage, right? Because the institution will always find a way to catch up.
I think that's really well said. I got one more kind of topic to cover before we switch over to the patron only half of our conversation. And this is maybe kind of a bridge between the two. So I wanted to talk a little bit with you about fiction storytelling, movies, novels, TV, comics, whatever. I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, that it can do a lot of things that nonfiction can't do. And I think the thing I keep finding myself the most interested in is the way in which, like, a scenario in a story, like a plot point or a beat, can be expertly placed in the center of a bunch of competing forces and ideas in a way that's very hard to do nonfiction wise, unless you're just like constantly doing throat clearing and defining your terms. And, it's tough to get that sort of epicenter in the middle of a web. And I thought of one example just from really recently. My wife and I just finished Three Body Problem on Netflix last night. I'm not going to spoil anything here, but that show and a bunch of moments in that show, they end up kind of living at the intersection of all these different questions, like the possibility of alien civilizations, but also the way that religion works, both modern religion, because like there are new religious movements that sort of start, but then also stuff that looks a lot more like ancient religion, where it's like direct service of a powerful being, which makes me think about the way that like ancient Israelites were choosing between Yahweh and Baal, like really old ancient forms of religion and new forms of religion, and almost like techno religion, the sort of like human advancement side of sort of the religion and spirituality world. And you can do that in fiction in a way how would I even do a podcast episode that brought all, it would be disjointed. It would be very, very long. But I can just like maybe in a 5-minute scene be thinking about all those things at once. And I thought, since you've done both a lot of nonfiction writing and also now novel writing, that you'd be a fun person to talk to about this power that fiction has.
Yeah, it's fun to rearrange. I mean, in every dimension, in every way. Like think about when things happen. In this story, it's the bulk of it is a 4-year high school story broken into 4 sections, and like each of those sections has sort of an overarching theme. Each one has sort of its own impending doom. And I was able to sort of organize things in a way where like it's not like I sat down and categorized them, but it just sort of like it's a way to like. Well, when should this happen? Well, it should happen here because that's what we're talking about there. If it's about predestination or original sin, that type of stuff, well, it goes in this year. So there's that, and then there's like sort of taking traits and this seems like this goes with this person. Like we don't have to line up with exactly. Like none of my characters are explicitly based on any real people. They all feel like, original people to me. The setting feels completely real, but all the people, so, it feels populated by me. So when I'm thinking about like this person that I've made up, does this trait go to them or them? And like you have the freedom to move those things around. And like I think about my own experiences, my own thoughts, my own memories. We're going to spread those around characters as well. And like, Isaac, the protagonist, there's some things about him that don't line up with my experiences, but I know people for whom they did. Right. That ability to, I guess, just reorganize things meaningfully might have been the biggest advantage of fiction, where it's like, yeah, it's here's the kit, here's the stuff. It's all the stuff, and we're going to arrange it in the way where it feels most meaningful.
Yeah, one of a subplot in the book that made me think of this is there's a main character where Isaac is trying to evangelize to a girl that he likes romantically, which, by the way, there's almost no subplot that puts me right back into my 16-year-old body as much as that one does. That is just that's a beeline straight to a particular time in my life. Much like when I re-listened to Love Song for a Savior by Jars of Clay for the first time in 15 years, I was like immediately back on our summer houseboats trip with my youth group. So kind of like that. But then that girl's queer. And so you already had something interesting, which is I like her, but I'm also supposed to make sure she doesn't go to hell. But now she's not even into me. And also that brings up what my church and my family and everybody I know says about gay people. And so just right there, you've got 3 or 4 strands, and that's just like someday, like, I'm good at nonfiction. I'm good at this. I'm good at sort of didactic. I'm good at talking. I think I'm pretty good at therapy. I'm good at sort of like dealing with cognitive content. But there are days when I really wish that I was like more of a TV showrunner type or a novelist or something, because I can't do that. I can't get all those things right there in a moment, almost like folded up into a proton. No spoilers.
Yeah, I mean, that moment is,
anything.
It's inspired by lots of real memories and lots of things that people have told me about their own memories and all that, and it's packaged in a way where it's saying a lot of things at once, and it's not just arriving at a moment, but it's changing things going forward, because Isaac has to choose essentially, like, which do I care about most here? Is it my friend agreeing with my religion? Is it my friend agreeing that my religion is right about her orientation? Is it let's be honest, a young adolescent, is it trying to get her to date me anyway, right? And like all these things are going on in his head in the middle of his like constant.
How firm is that queer identity?
Yeah. He's like,
is this a little fungible? Could
I want to affirm and support, but also, if you were to explore, I would affirm and support that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, the best kind of allyship is like helping you remain open-minded.
Right. Like, yeah. I just want to make sure it's a no for you. It's totally for you. Yeah. And this is all in the middle of a crisis of faith, and
right.
Yeah. Social crisis and everything else all at once.
Yeah. Well, let's transition over to the Patreon feed. For those on the main feed, this has been Jason Kirk. We're going to have a link to the book and his own podcasts in the show notes. And appreciate you guys joining us over on the Patreon feed.